Welcome to the UW Now Livestream. Tonight, we're discussing America's leading research universities and the current perceptions and policies that are shaping them. Our panelists are experts in public opinion and government relations. Ken Goldstein is a political analyst, former professor of political science at UW-Madison, and senior fellow at the Association of American Universities, or AAU. Craig Thompson is the vice chancellor of university relations, overseeing a broad range of the university's stakeholder relationships, including state government, federal agencies, and the United States Congress. He's also a 1991 graduate of UW-Madison. Our conversation tonight will be moderated by your host, Mike Knetter.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. A couple of months ago, we talked a bit about research funding cuts and how they were impacting work being done at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and what the university could do to preserve vital projects. Of course, UW is far from alone in those challenges. America's leading research universities dominate global rankings, and they've played a critical role in economic development, national defense, and social mobility dating back to World War II, yet they all face substantial cuts to research funding and more. Some, such as Harvard and Columbia, have been singled out for even greater cuts to federal support well beyond research funding and much deeper in research funding. Tonight, we're going to revisit this topic from a slightly broader perspective, specifically how and why have public perceptions of universities changed in recent years? And are the Trump administration policies a reaction to this deteriorating sentiment? Does the public approve of the new policies, or have they missed their mark or gone too far? After Ken Goldstein discusses those perception issues, we're going to hear from Craig Thompson on what we currently know about the range of federal actions that have been implemented at UW-Madison to date. How have research funding, international student visas, and financial aid been affected so far? And where is this all headed? Will these policies withstand legal challenges that they face in the courts? We'll find out. So those are a few of the questions we hope to address. And of course, we'll look for your questions in the live chat, and we'll pose those to our presenters after they're done. So we're going to go first tonight to Ken Goldstein, who is a senior fellow at the AAU, as mentioned. He's a former UW-Madison professor, and he is one of our leading authorities on politics and polling. Ken, thanks for joining us tonight, wherever you may be. I know it's been a hectic and harrowing week for you with so many friends and family in the Middle East, and I know it's also a hectic time in your day job dealing with all the pressures that universities are facing. So thanks for taking time to share your insights with us.
You bet. Thanks for the kind words, and always good to be back in Madison, even if I'm virtually back in Madison. Mike's intro was actually really good at setting the stage. And one of the things he talked about is what's the public opinion environment? Is that causing what's going on? I would maybe just tweak it a little bit and say it's created the environment where the cuts we're seeing and the policies we're seeing are possible. So these are not my data. I do lots of survey work, but these are from Gallup, a very well-regarded survey research think tank firm. And every year they ask about America's confidence in a whole variety of institutions. They ask about small business, the military, the police, the presidency, the Supreme Court every year. Episodically, they ask about higher education. And here are some data from 2015 to 2024. They actually asked, for the first time ever, they asked it in back-to-back years in 2023 and 2024 about higher education. And what you see here is a couple things. Higher education is still in the top echelon of the institutions that Americans have confidence in, with small business, the military, the police, and the medical system ranking above it. So that's the good news. The bad news is the single greatest drop we see is with higher education. Now, I guess it's a sliver of good news. Because it was so high to start with, things like Congress and television news and big business could not have gone down by as much as higher education has gone down, because they weren't that high to begin with. Another piece of important news for understanding the environment is the huge headwinds, and we're going to hear from my old friend Craig Thompson here in a few minutes. He's not only having to work in an environment where trust, confidence, favorability in higher education has gone down, but trust in all institutions has gone down. So the normal levers that we would try and communicate, persuade, convince, educate people about our value are much more difficult to use. And what this shows is where that decline has happened. And we certainly had polarization in this country in 2015, and everyone was talking about polarization in 2015. But when it came to attitudes towards higher education, it actually wasn't that polarized. From 2015 to 2023, we've seen a little bit of a drop from Democrats, a little bit of a drop from independents, but Republicans have fallen off a cliff. And we obviously have, in the state of Wisconsin, Republicans controlled the entire state government for many years. Now Democrats control the governor's mansion and Republicans control the legislature. At the federal level, Republicans, there is unified control. And so Republicans tend to mostly pay attention to Republicans or Republican primary voters. So that huge plunge in confidence has created the environment where we can see some of the cuts, some of the attacks, some of the policies that are currently happening. And then just below that, and they're correlated because Republicans now tend to be more likely to not have a college degree. That would especially be the case in a state like Wisconsin. We're seeing huge educational polarization, where the biggest drop in confidence in higher education is among those people who don't have a college degree. So it's my challenge, it's our challenge, it's not only Craig's challenge, to convince people, even if they don't go to one of our leading research universities, they still benefit and their kids still benefit in a variety of ways from the things that we do. But that is a very challenging argument to make in the current environment that we are in. Now, I'll make one last little comment, and Mike, I'd really love to just sort of make this a conversation between us, as we have had many times before. I keep using the term higher education. That speaks to a whole variety of different institutions: private institutions, public institutions, for-profit institutions, institutions that mostly have a teaching mission, and an institution like Wisconsin that has an everything mission. It's a teaching mission, it's a research mission, and it's a service mission. And although I love all of our colleges and universities, my job is telling the story of leading research universities, of which University of Wisconsin-Madison is one of the top.
Well, Ken, I know that you're in the field doing work for a lot of different universities, and you can't necessarily reveal specific results, but in a minute, I'd like you to share a bit about what you've learned in the field about the public's reaction to these policies. But before we do that, just talking a little bit about the data you just covered, I'm always fascinated by how much people hate big business and love small business. It has nothing to do with our program, but I just would wonder if the public knows who made big businesses big. They did. Anyway, that's a whole different story, but that's quite a mystery there.
So, well, it's also, I don't want to, we can go on tangents, but like big business doesn't sound great, right?
That's true.
And so, it's not like we're Wag the Dog where you describe yourselves in different ways and it solves all the problems. But even in the work we do for universities, how we describe what we do is important.
Yeah. Well, what makes a business is a customer, and big business has a lot of customers, apparently, but I guess we don't like them.
Probably started as a small business.
Correct. One thing I wonder about, I realize Pew only has this question in their survey periodically, but what do you know about the nature of the decline between 2015 and 2023 in sentiment toward higher education? And was that steady, or was it impacted by, President Trump being elected in 2016? Was it impacted by the pandemic and how universities managed that? Were there specific things that you think drove that deterioration more than others?
Yeah, so I think the answer is yes. I think it's all of the above. And I am in the field all the time with national work and with work for various institutions, which I'll broadly. If anyone wants to meet me at the Terrace Tuesday night and buy me a couple beers, I can tell them the secret sauce. But here we'll keep it more broad. Everything I am doing is consistent with that picture I showed you in those two public slides. And I wonder if I have any former, students on, and they'll remember all the nerdy things I would say. One of the challenges for universities is it's not obvious what our dependent variable is in terms of public opinion or attitudes. Studied elections for a long time. I studied elections at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for a long time. I taught elections at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for a long time. The dependent variable is pretty clear. Who'd you vote for? The same way the dependent variable for big business or small business is pretty clear. Customers and revenue and profits. Universities have a whole variety of dependent variables, both in terms of what we produce and how hard that is to sometimes measure, knowledge, right? Educating students and benefiting them, which might not be clear 1, 2, or 3 years after they graduate, but benefits them long down the line. But also in how we ask about that. Is it favorability? Are they going in the right direction? Is it confidence, like Gallup? I mean, one of the quibbles I have with that Gallup question is higher education's too broad. And then also confidence. Well, confidence to do what? I have great confidence in big business to do some things. I don't have great confidence in big business to do other things. I would even say the same thing with universities. And I hope this isn't triggering to anybody, but last year I had great confidence in the University of Wisconsin to produce great research. I didn't have great confidence in them to produce lots of points on offense, right? So it depends what we're asking about. So I ask a variety of different dependent variables or outcome variables. And there has been a slow decline. We actually saw an uptick in the early days of COVID when people especially appreciated what we were doing both on the research side in terms of medical research, and also our universities were literally the front line of treating people with COVID. But that steady decline continued, and then after October 7th, and especially some events that happened at other campuses, created a much steeper drop in various perceptions. That said, it's not a cliff. I just got out of the field a couple days ago. I am in the field all the time. I love all my dependent variables. I love all my questions, but my favorite one, basically, it asks, are you better off or worse off because of University of Wisconsin or University of Michigan or USC or whatever the institution is? And what that's saying to people, and I'm paraphrasing, is you can be frustrated with us for a whole variety of reasons. But at the end of the day, come on, don't you think this country, this state, this community is better off because of the work we do? That has declined slightly. That has not gone off a cliff. That's the number we have to keep strong for our universities to continue to be great and for Greg to be able to continue to do his job.
That's a great insight is, what are we really asking people to respond to in these surveys? Because you can read a lot into the decline, but that is a funny question, as you point out. It is true that lately I get the sense a lot of people are onto the fact that just because university grads do well in the labor market doesn't mean it's all because of the university, right? It's not random selection to get into the university. So the people who get in are probably people who are already naturally positioned to be successful economically. So I sense that there's a lot of people asking those questions like, well, how valuable is the university really? I mean, after all, Bill Gates didn't finish his degree at Harvard, and he started Microsoft, right? But when you really look around the world and look at, who are the successful countries and what are the countries who are trying to catch them doing, the successful countries have good institutions of higher learning. They have a highly educated population, and the ones who are trying to catch up are trying to close that gap in education with great universities themselves. So I think the value is there, and it's great to learn that you're seeing that in the field.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a many-hour discussion on the value part. One thing that does concern me is we are seeing a gender gap in how people value a college degree. And we're not only seeing that in the public opinion data, we're also seeing that, and I don't know if you're seeing it at UW-Madison, but many institutions are also seeing it in applications and yield.
You think the public is happy with the shift in policy toward higher ed that we've seen under the Trump administration?
No, I don't. I think they are largely unaware of it. I mean, one of the things I'm always reminding our chancellors and presidents is all of you think about this all of the time. And normal people don't think about all of this all of the time. And if you just think of all of the things that have happened in the last 3 or 4 months, how far down would it have to be to a normal person to talk about some complicated cut to F&A that the Trump administration did? Now, that said, when you talk about cuts to medical research, they haven't heard about it, but they're against it.
Good to know. Good to know. Yeah, to your point, things are changing so rapidly. I think I read an article this morning that talked about, it was only 15 days ago we were all obsessed with the Trump-Musk dust-up that was going on social media. And you think about all the things that have happened since then in 15 days. And so no wonder we just sort of get trampled over as an issue in most people's minds. They're looking at other things, but that's Craig's job. And so why don't we go next to Craig Thompson? I want to bring Craig on, and he is our vice chancellor for university relations, and he's been with us for about a year now. Craig has spent his career working in state government and other areas of government relations, lobbying, heading up agencies in the government, and really highly respected person in the state of Wisconsin for working across the aisle, as passe as that has become now, I guess. But Craig, it's great to have you on, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about what do you do in university relations, and what do we know about what's happening on the ground with research grant funding right now at Madison, international student visas, and maybe student loans or other forms of support on the horizon. So Craig, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. Appreciate the introduction. I always enjoy listening to Ken. I always feel like I get a little smarter after, maybe not always feeling more uplifted after hearing about the public's perceptions, but it's always great to hear. So I thought I'd start out just very briefly talking a little bit about what university relations is for folks that don't really know what's in our purview. And it really can be summed up, I think, by looking at that we really focus on 3 key areas, which is advocacy, outreach, and maintaining and building our partnerships. So within that, in order to do that, the areas that we have are really our campus and visitor relations, which we take care of the campus tours and with our prospective students, as well as information desks and general information phone line. Our tribal relations, where we manage our relationships with our 11 federally recognized tribes, with our Wisconsin Tribal Education Promise, as well as our Native Nations Working Group. Our community relations, which really does focus on our community relations here where UW-Madison is housed within the city of Madison and Dane County. So really our relationships with the city government and the city council, the county executive and the county board of supervisors. We have our South Madison partnership out on Park Street doing in interacting with the community, the Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce, Downtown Madison Inc., and the like, in our key partnerships, including Odyssey Project and the Madison Metropolitan School District and Centro Hispano. Then we have our Office of Business Engagement, which really deals with our industry-sponsored research, our relationships with the private sector, our campus agreements and partnerships with groups like American Family. Then we have our state relations and our statewide outreach, which really is working with the state Senate and the state Assembly, the governor's office, trying to promote and advance our policies there. Where now, many people probably know watching this, we're in the midst of a state budget where there's a lot of things hanging in the balance there. And finally, what we're really here to talk about more today is our federal relations group, which is our presence out in Washington, D.C., and really working with our federal delegation, with the federal agencies that are so important to funding for our different areas, with our national peer organizations like AAU and APLU, and really trying to advance our research portfolio and funding our priorities for UW-Madison as it comes to the federal level, which I'll talk about in a minute, just how important that is. Listening to Ken talk about some of the sort of transformative changes that are happening right now in public perception with higher education. Don't want to spend a lot of time, but just to talk a little bit, we all hear a lot about the historic relationship that the federal government has had with higher education here in the United States. And just thinking about it, to look a little bit of the history of some of that and the federal government's interaction relationship with that really goes back to 1862, to the Morrill Act, which was also known as the Land Grant College Act, which did establish land grant institutions to provide for what they called, quote, the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes in the several pursuits and professions in life. And so obviously UW-Madison was one of those universities that benefited from that act. In 1914, we had the Smith-Lever Act, which really started federal funding of cooperative extensions like UW Extension, which of course benefits all 72 counties in the state of Wisconsin. And then as we came out of World War II, I think basic research, investment in education became more and more evident and supported in the U.S. as far as really cementing our position in the world as a superpower, and was felt that it was robust, that robust science was necessary for national prosperity and well-being. We established the National Science Foundation in 1950, and also looked at providing pathways for people to be able to afford college was imperative in order to be able to solve that. So in 1944, we had the GI Bill. We had veterans returning home from service that they could receive funds for college tuition and additional education opportunities. In 1958, we had the National Defense Education Act, which really was in response to the Soviet launch of Sputnik. And it really created aid to grow in key areas like math, science, and foreign language, and provided graduate students fellowships to grow our pool of educators and researchers. In 1965, we had our Higher Education Act, which the goal was to expand access to higher education and create programs to provide financial assistance to students, including low interest loans and work study opportunities. And in 1972, when they were reauthorizing the Higher Education Act, was when they created it was later called the Pell Grant that we're all familiar with, in honor of Thurgood and Pell's dedication to expanding access to college students from less affluent backgrounds. So, just taking a minute there to talk about when we talk about the historic, history that the federal government has had with higher education, to think of some of those impacts that they've had. But to get into a little bit more, I think what we wanted to talk about today, and the relationship with UW-Madison and where we sit and the economic impact that we have. If you really look at UW-Madison, as Ken had talked about, we are one of the leading research institutions in the country. As a matter of fact, last year, We jumped up from 8th to 6th in the HERD rankings, which really measure federal research expenditures. So we were 6th in the country for federal research expenditures. And the federal government, when we look at the budget of UW-Madison, is such a huge part of us. It's roughly 25% of our budget comes from federal sources, and much of those are research dollars. So, the federally supported research really is critical for the United States to continue to be a superpower from our standpoint, as far as in biotechnology and quantum computing and so many other areas. So that federal support for academic research really is also just crucial for training our workforce, which obviously we need to be able to move forward in those areas as well. So if you look at a recent study from a team of economists at American University's Institute for Macroeconomic and Policy Analysis, found that if we cut out non-defense federal R&D support, if we cut that by 25%, we would reduce our gross domestic product by about almost 4%, about 3.8%. And reductions in R&D investments would also decrease our economy's tax base, reducing overall federal revenues by about 4.3%. So, when Ken was talking about, how the public views this, that they still support a lot of these areas, they're not necessarily fans of cutting medical research and the like. But there are these headwinds that Ken talked about that the public has, that's being manifested in some of the policies that we're seeing in some of the state and federal levels towards higher education. For UW-Madison, what we're seeing right now, cutting to more of the point what you brought up in the beginning, Mike, I would say the word that I really want to underscore for this more than anybody truly is uncertainty. As far as what we've seen so far, the actual cuts are significant, but not dramatic yet. We've had just south of 80 grants that have been terminated, about 78 out of more than 2,100 grants that we have. The total amount of those was mid to upper $50 million, but the unspent amount of that was closer to 20. But what we're seeing is just the rapidity with which the new terms are coming in, the things that they're asking higher education to agree to be able to get new grants, backward looking at those grants. There's still a lot that are in jeopardy. There are a lot of proposals. One of the biggest ones, and I know you covered this in a previous episode, would be to cut either you call it the indirect rate or the facilities and administration rate down to 15%. And if they did that across the board here at UW-Madison, we would be talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. Across the different agencies, each time that's been attempted, that has been held up in court, whether the administration has the authority to do that or not unilaterally. But as Congress now is acting both on the authorization process, which is the Reconciliation Act, known as the actual title being the Big Beautiful Bill Act, and then through the appropriations process for the budget. If they would decide to do that at that level, they could. I think there's not really many legal arguments that they would not have the ability to do that, which would have a significant impact on research institutions like UW-Madison. So, that's hanging in the balance, what's out there right now. The Reconciliation Act, or the Big Beautiful Bill Act, that's going on right now, that includes the Trump tax cut, includes a lot of things people read about, like state and local tax deductions, different things. The the biggest areas that impact UW-Madison specifically that's in that reauthorization really is the financial aid components, where there were some drastic changes made in the House version. It's been made somewhat better in the Senate version for things like Pell Grant that I talked about. They improved it some, but it would still there would still be an impact for some of the financial aid areas. And then the changes in Medicaid for the SNAP Ed program would have some significant impact on the FoodWise program, which affects our UW extension program here, which could impact over 100 jobs here. So that's in the reauthorization process. But then in the appropriations process, the budget bill that once they get done with reconciliation, that they need to address, where the governor's introduced that, or the president rather has introduced that, and they will get to. That's where we're seeing cuts to agencies. For UW-Madison, NIH is by far our biggest funder. They're proposing to cut that by 43%. Our second biggest area that we get grants in is in NSF, and they're proposing to cut that by 57%. And so you don't know exactly how those cuts will mean in the amount of grants that institutions get from it. But obviously there would be a lot less money to go around significantly. And just the capabilities within those agencies themselves of the people who are left to administer those grants could really have dramatic, devastating impacts on major research institutions like UW-Madison. Then there is there's some specific universities that have been singled out for other individual cuts that many have read about, whether Harvard or Columbia, Northwestern, and others. At this point, luckily, so far UW-Madison has not been one of those. And then there's the student visa situation that you talked about. And that, I guess the best way to describe that is where I began with this uncertainty. We're working with our international students. There was some CVIS revocations of their records earlier this year. That was reversed. There's been some talks about limiting students from China. That seems to have been mitigated. So there's just a tremendous amount of uncertainty in that space, and we continue to work in those areas. So the reconciliation portion, the portions I talked about with financial aid and SNAP-Ed, Medicaid, and those, they're hoping to get done by July 4th or so. And then they would move on to the budget, which would expire in September, which has those larger cuts to those federal agencies that I talked about, and that they would need to get that done by September. And if they can't, which a lot of people and pundits and folks in Washington, D.C. don't believe that they may be able to, then they would pass a continuing resolution, either short term, maybe till December, or a longer term. So I think I'll stop there, Mike, and try to outline some of the major areas that we're facing right now.
Appreciate that. That's a great overview, Craig. Thank you for that. And thank you for mentioning the big, beautiful bill, which perhaps from a naming standpoint is the culmination of a storied history of the names of these appropriation bills. Oh my God. Is it ever going to get any better? I mean,
it is actually the official title.
I know. It's, but these titles just keep getting more and more surreal. Anyway, there's two sides to every story. And of course, there are many truths in all situations. I think what I would say is it is undeniable that universities have had an enormous positive impact on the country. And you see that by looking at, who founded and who leads the top technology companies in the United States. Where are these companies located? They're all on the doorstep of great research universities. The importance of invention and innovation to our national defense and global technological leadership, it's undeniable. Okay. And just the transformation of individual lives that occurs because of opportunities people get. And, no one appreciates that more than me. My father only finished 8th grade, and, the life I've gotten to lead because of public education is mind-boggling to me. But there is also a lot of federal dollars going to universities, and arguably we could say, well, who are the beneficiaries of that? Probably people who are pretty lucky to begin with. So maybe we should be looking more carefully at what are those dollars really going for? And I was listening to Ken when he said, these big public universities especially have such an amorphous mission. And maybe there's a certain frustration that we need to reckon with. So I'll start with you, Ken. Is there a way to split the baby here? And, can we actually tighten belts and make the higher ed system better as a result of this? I mean, are there changes that you think universities needed to make? What are your thoughts on that?
Almost want to throw the tightening belt question back at you as the economist and someone who has run things. But I think it's very important for in general life and in universities that you also use crises as an opportunity. And this is a crisis. And the notion that everything we do in terms of all the economics of a university, not to mention how we run it, is absolutely perfect, and there's zero changes that we might want to make. No one would say that about anything. Now, be very clear. I am not for the destructive cuts and attacks that are happening. And it's very difficult to make changes or reforms when one is under such relentless attack. But I think we have to, both for the long-term health of our universities, and although I hate the political in Washington, D.C. term of optics, also to show that we're getting the message a little bit. Wow, we saw that public perceptions have declined. We may not think that's fair or accurate, or some of them may be fair and accurate. And we have to either resolve the ones that we think are fair and accurate and tell a better story on the ones that we don't think are fair and accurate. But I think I'm not speaking on behalf of AAU here, we as an industry have to use this crisis also as an opportunity. And listen, I can talk about what I owe to America's leading research universities, and what my kids owe to America's leading research universities. And I'm deeply, deeply, deeply appreciative. And universities are so good at so many things. They're not so great at changing direction. They are really, really big battleships. And if we can use this crisis to try and make some changes that we all probably know are needed, then I think we shouldn't waste that opportunity either. And don't ask me what those changes are.
I would never do that. And Craig, I won't ask you if we need to make changes. I know you're an employee of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and so that gets hashed out inside the executive team, I know, and I'm not going to ask you to necessarily opine on that, but tell me a little bit about how this has made it. How does this affect the backdrop of your work as you go to the Capitol and talk to people about, the state capitol or, our representatives in Washington? How does this change your approach to things, and, what are the challenges that you see?
Well, it's a great question, Mike. And I think, whether if we're talking at the state legislature or with our delegation at the federal level, the divide we're seeing in the country is represented, with our elected officials as well. And so, when Ken's talking about not wasting a crisis, I don't disagree with that we are facing a crisis right now that we have to try to be managing through, and it does force us to be looking at things. And I also think it's a time for us to be introspective in higher education as to why people are feeling this way. I know the chancellor's talked about this. I think, we've said that there's things that we believe we can do better. We're trying to, some of those criticisms come from a belief that there's been a bit of a monolith of thought on campus. And I think, we have talked, the chancellor's talked a lot about pluralism, doing deliberation dinners, really trying to create an atmosphere on campus where viewpoint diversity is taken seriously and that it's real. And so I think, when we get in talking dollars and cents about the need for this and not wanting to harm all of the great work that's going on, whether it's in Alzheimer's or cancer research or diabetes research, there's this underlying feeling out there that's showing up, I think, in the polling that Ken's doing, that we have to address. And I think we're trying to have that real conversation with our elected officials.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that. So I'm going to go to some audience questions. William Schmitz wonders if Ken could unpack a bit the factors that really explain the drop in perception of higher education. Is it access, affordability, excellence? Is it, wokeism? I mean, we've all read the articles that try to diagnose it. You're in the field more than anyone I know, kind of trying to really read what's driving things. What's your sense of what's happened in the last decade? What's driving it?
Yeah, so I think it's a variety of things, and each of those are drivers. But I think at the end of the day, the biggest coefficient, the biggest factor is probably the polarization in this country and the fact that we have become polarized. So polarization is not new, but it's become even more extreme. And what does polarization mean? It's just like, Democrats will think the opposite of Republicans, and we're not only seeing partisanship, but we're seeing negative partisanship. If the other team likes it, I'm not going to like it. And I think for a long time, and it's the reason why all those bills passed that Craig talked about. I'm not looking at the votes, but I bet all of those passed by large bipartisan majorities. Nothing passes by even a bipartisan majority if you define bipartisan as one or two people from the other party. So there's extreme polarization in the country, and we have become polarized, where a swath of people, actually both people, Democrats and Republicans, will feel more that universities are a democratic institution, a Democratic Party institution. And my bet would be that's the biggest coefficient, the biggest factor.
Interesting.
I just want to say, I first met Craig way back when Republicans and Democrats would drink together in bars and taverns in Madison. And we're all sort of smiling, but it was sort of, probably not allowed to swear on this broadcast, but, go at it pretty hard during the day, but then people would get together. Sadly, my sense is that happens less so in Wisconsin, and it certainly happens less so in Washington, D.C. And that is a huge factor.
So, Ken, as you pointed to those big landmark pieces of legislation that Craig had highlighted, it does strike me that many of those passed at a time when the federal budget was growing. Do you think some of the partisanship is because we're now in a mode where we're kind of shrinking and everything is harder in that kind of world? So, when there's more money rolling in every year and we're agreeing to spend more money, our constituents, of course, are going to be happy we're spending more money. It's a lot easier to agree on that stuff. Do you think some of this is related to just we're kind of in a world of greater scarcity and we have to fight harder and we're really cutting things versus growing?
Somewhat. I mean, we've benefited so for instance, with the COVID bills, that was a lot of money that went out to the states that benefited us. But this is not the first time that we've been in an environment where we're always talking about supposedly cutting, and we actually never end up cutting. And I'm not even sure the environment we're in now is going to net be a cut. So we have to be competitive and tell our story and do politics in a lot more effective fashion, because it's not just automatically going to happen. I mean, Mike, when you worked in politics, people were talking about reining in the federal budget, right?
Yes.
It was more than 5, 10, 15 years ago.
I think we had like this Graham-Rudman balanced budget amendment back then. Wasn't that quaint? I always talk about the fact that a guy put up the national debt clock in the 1970s. He thought crisis was imminent then. Wow, that thing's had to add a lot of new digits since he put it up. Stuart Feldman asks, can research universities survive without the influx of foreign students, given the fall off in available U.S. foreign students? Craig, you want to take a shot at that? I mean, how important is the foreign student enrollment, particularly in graduate programs at UW? Do you have a sense of that?
Mike, you between your business school experience and with the foundation, you know this probably better than I do. But can we survive? I would imagine yes, but is it going to have a significant impact on both what our outputs, the students that we've put out that have helped cure diseases, start businesses, create spin-off startups, all of those things? yes, I mean, it would have a significant impact. It's a big part of our graduate school, and to just arbitrarily limit that will have real life implications.
Yeah. One of the most important takeaways, I think, from a trip I did recently to India, we had some alumni events over there, and we also, our endowment has an overweight position in the Indian economy. We like what's going on there. So we visited with some investment managers and companies. And the thing that struck me leaving that visit overall was, foreign students coming to the US and getting graduate degrees, even undergraduate degrees, but it's mostly graduate degrees in large number, only became a phenomenon really in the 1980s, a little bit in the 70s, but really it was in the 80s and 90s that grew a lot. And so for the first time, we now actually have people in these countries, graduates of American universities, in the highest echelon of their society. And what a great advantage that is for the United States in terms of soft power. And I think we probably don't use that enough. So I think when people look at, we have these foreign students coming and benefiting from our education system, well, a lot of them do stay here and contribute to our economy. And many of them are the ones that have started some of these dynamic tech companies. But even the ones that go home, it's not like that's not a benefit that we enjoy and something that kind of brings our world a little closer together. So I don't see, I think there are people who feel like we're closing the door on a lot of American students. The demand for STEM fields by American students isn't what it needs to be. Let's just face it, and so it's great that America has been able to draw the very best talent from all over the world for decades, and it would be a shame to lose that. So another question coming in, it seems like the public's reaction to campus activism today, whether it was, pro-Palestinian movement or other things, is driving the decline in public confidence in higher education. So maybe a very progressive leaning form of activism. How is this different than what happened in the 60s and 70s? And do you think a politicized media and social media have an impact in driving these headwinds against higher ed beyond what they would have been, 50 years ago during that period of activism? Well, I guess it's more than 50 years now, but 60. Ken, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I think the anti-Israel protests and the encampments and those pictures definitely had an impact on public opinion, and especially elite public opinion in some areas. And I don't want to be Pollyannish, but we probably have people who are on the University of Wisconsin campus in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And I think a lot of people romanticize about what that time was like, but I think it was a pretty scary time when I've talked to alumni who were on campus at that time. And the reaction of people in the state who had a hard time understanding why those things were happening on their flagship institution's campus. So I'm not saying it's not serious, but it is, I think we can romanticize what previous times were like. And I'm not that old. I wasn't around then, or I was around then, but I was 3. And it was also, I think, a confusing time to many people in the state. And it was also a time when the university both received and relied on the state for a lot more funding than it gets now.
Greg, any thoughts on that?
Well, I would agree with that. It's interesting to me. I was born in 1969, so I think like Ken, I was pretty young during that. But when we do talk about these are the most polarized times, those if you look at what was going on campuses during those years, those were some pretty tense times as well. So it is always interesting to me when you juxtapose this versus then, not having really experienced it myself. But what was going on in college campuses then obviously got to a pretty fevered pitch during the Vietnam War. We're we don't have those external factors going on right now. But obviously there's other issues that are causing that strain that's really, I think, more reflected out in general society right now.
Great book that a University of Wisconsin-Madison alum wrote. I think David Marinus went to UW-Madison.
Yeah.
You might be getting the title wrong. They marched into sunshine, or they walked into sunlight. Yeah, it's an incredible book, and it juxtaposes some young Wisconsin men walking into an ambush in Vietnam and some young people on the campus of University of Wisconsin-Madison demonstrating at the time, and really paints a picture of that time.
So I've got an interesting question from the insightful and inimitable Hans Kuttner, who you both know.
Hello, Hans.
Hans says, I think Ken's work has found that MIT has the most favorable view among survey respondents. Is it time to become the Wisconsin Institute of Technology? That is a classic Hans Kuttner question.
So I won't tell you what the survey data says, but Hans will, who sat through many of our presentations. So watch me not answer the question. What we do know is that part of the reason why Americans appreciate America's leading research universities, when they think about research, they think about medical research, engineering research, and the sorts of things that happen at the MITs, the Georgia Techs, for instance. And I'm not sure if he was joking, but there definitely is an important part of a brand when a university is more front and center, that they are dealing with those sorts of issues or tackling those sorts of issues. How did I do it around that one?
Yeah, I think it directly ties to the economic development mission, and people care more about that. I think, it's easy to see how those STEM fields, they tend to be less controversial, I guess, and people don't associate it with, problems of viewpoint diversity, which I would say they associate more with humanities and social sciences. So it's kind of easy to see why that sort of branding for MIT and just kind of where they put their resources protects them a little bit. Craig, are you?
Don't you think that what remains interesting to me about this is, and I guess you go where the leverage is, but I completely agree with everything that was just said. And talking to a lot of whether it's federal delegation, others, strong support for the STEM areas in science, and concerns about some of the liberal arts and some of the, again, as we talked about, what's viewed as wokeism in those different areas. But if you look at what they're cutting NSF, they're cutting NIH, or proposing to at this point. I mean, NASA, those are the science areas.
Fair point. I mean, they're mandating certain things in other areas, I guess we would say, both at the state and federal level, but interesting. We are coming up on the top of the hour. I would like to ask you each to think about something you could tell us that makes you optimistic about the future of higher education and the country. And Ken, why don't you tell me what makes you optimistic about the future of higher ed in the country? And then Craig, we'll go to you.
Well, you've known me for a long time, and I am a exuberant optimist. But I'm also a realist. So these are challenging times, and we need to do better. We're not going back to what the world was like for our institutions. That said, the talent we have within our institutions and the talent we have within this country is still phenomenal. And you also talked about foreign students, and I use too many sports analogies. Listen, we're like an NFL team with no salary cap. Everyone wants to come play for our team. Everyone wants to come to our universities. Everyone wants to do research at our universities. So we got to figure out a way to make that happen.
Great message. Right.
I guess I would say, Mike, is building on what Ken said. I mean, first of all, we do stand at a point where we have the preeminent institutions of higher education in the world, and people want to come here. But we are at a point where there is this questioning of what's going on in campuses, and I guess what I'm optimistic about is I know here at UW-Madison and talking to colleagues in the Big Ten and the AAU, I think there's a sincere introspection that's going on among campuses saying, some of these points are valid, and we need to look at this and not just do window dressing change, but be real about looking at why there's been some of the faith broken, and that we can do better and increase our viewpoint diversity and make sure that the University of Madison and others really is the place for sifting and winnowing of all ideas. And I'm confident if people that are upset with higher ed don't throw the baby out with the bathwater here in this next budget cycle, that I think we can get to a place where there's real dialogue and real change.
Well, thank you both. I think this has been a really informative evening. It probably is true because our institutions, because of their governance, are slow to change and difficult to change for a leader. Probably it might have taken something like this to maybe shake the institutions, and we'll find a better way. That's certainly what I believe. I think we're capable of more, but we're already the best in the world. I mean, 25 or so of the top 30 research universities in the world are in the United States. And, I hope that we will keep them open to the best talent in the world, because I think that has been something that's been important to the story of American exceptionalism that is now being called into question. And I think we're a big part of the answer, and we got to find a way to get everyone aligned and back on side and moving forward together again. So, one of the great things about working at a university, I know you guys both know this and appreciate this, but we actually enjoy the support of both sides of the aisle in our alumni population. And, we're in a special place to be able to convene people of different viewpoints. And so our opportunity to make an impact's probably never been greater. So that gives me some hope. So thank you both for taking time out of your Tuesday evening to be here. Very, very interesting program. And I want to thank our audience for joining us, for all their questions. And if you ever miss an episode, heavens, you can always watch it on our YouTube channel and find the links in the UW Now Weekly. So we'll be back again in July to feature more experts. The number of timely and important topics we can choose from seems to be endless right now. And I'm sure we'll be back with an interesting program in a few weeks. Thank you, and on Wisconsin.